I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Jaycee Dugard case. These are my speculations. Have you ever wondered how a single accident in adolescence could set off a chain of psychological distortions that culminate in one of the most prolonged abductions in history? Philip Garrido suffered a serious motorcycle crash as a teenager, which his family described as a turning point that led to heavy drug use and erratic behavior, potentially exacerbating underlying mental health vulnerabilities like anxiety and personality disorders. What compels someone to abduct an 11-year-old and hold her captive for 18 years, all while convinced that divine voices guide their actions? In this episode of The Clinical File, we'll examine the mental health indicators in Philip Garrido's case.
The Clinical File with John Cordray.
Philip Garrido suffered a serious motorcycle crash as a teenager, which his family described as a turning point that led to heavy drug use and erratic behavior, potentially exacerbating underlying mental health vulnerabilities like anxiety and personality disorders. What compels someone to abduct an 11-year-old girl and hold her captive for 18 years, all while convinced that divine voices guide their actions? In this episode of The Clinical File, we'll examine the mental health indicators in Philip Garrido's life, from early traumas to his delusional beliefs, to understand the possible psychological forces that drove this crime. Stick with me as I uncover how overconfidence in one's distorted reality can blind a person to the harm they inflict, and why recognizing these red flags early might prevent such tragedies in the future. We begin with the most recent information on this case, which shows investigators still probing connections to other unsolved abductions. In recent years, authorities have revisited Philip's life in prison, questioning him about potential links to other cases, such as the 1988 disappearance of 9-year-old Michaela Garrett from Hayward, California. Although Philip was cleared of involvement in that specific incident after interviews as late as 2021, this ongoing scrutiny highlights how his history of predatory behavior continues to raise questions for law enforcement even today. Additionally, in 2022, the parole officer who played a key role in the 2009 rescue publicly shared his account for the first time, expressing regret for not discovering the victim during earlier home visits, but emphasizing his persistence in questioning that ultimately led to the breakthrough. These updates remind us that psychological aftermath of such crimes lingers, affecting not just the victims, but also those in the system tasked with oversight. Now let's step back to the origins of this story. Starting in the morning in June 1991, 11-year-old Jaycee walked up a hill toward her school bus stop in Myers, California, near South Lake Tahoe, wearing her favorite pink outfit. Her stepfather, Carl, watched from the garage as a gray sedan suddenly pulled up, and a man stunned Jaycee with a taser before his wife helped drag her into the car, marking the start of an 18-year-old nightmare that would reveal deep-seated psychological issues in the perpetrator. Philip, 39, drove Jaycee 120 miles at his home in Antioch, California, where he and his wife Nancy confined her into a series of hidden tents and sheds in their backyard. From a mental health perspective, this act of abduction points to a profound lack of empathy, often seen in individuals with antisocial personality traits, where the needs of others are completely disregarded in favor of a personal gratification. Philip's history suggests these traits did not emerge overnight. Born in 1951 in Pittsburgh, California, he grew up in a nearby Brentwood and seemed like a typical teenager until that motorcycle accident around the age of 14. His father later described him as a good boy who played guitar in band. But the head injury coincided with heavy drug use, which can severely alter brain chemistry and contribute to psychotic symptoms like auditory hallucinations that Philip would later report. This combination of trauma and substance abuse raises a key psychological indicator: how unresolved injuries from youth can fuel maladaptive coping mechanisms, leading to a cycle of deviance. In Philip's case, drugs may have amplified pre-existing vulnerabilities, creating a distorted worldview where he felt entitled to control others. By the 1970s, Phillip's behavior escalated into criminal acts. In 1972, at age 21, he was arrested for drugging and attempting to rape a 14-year-old girl, though the charges were dropped when the victim chose not to testify. This incident foreshadowed a pattern of targeting vulnerable young females, a red flag for predatory paraphilic disorders, where sexual arousal is linked to non-consensual acts. Psychologically, such patterns often stem from a need for power, especially in early life experiences left someone feeling powerless, as Phillip may have after his accident and family struggles. 4 years later, in 1976, Phillip was accused of kidnapping 25-year-old Katie Calloway Hall from a parking lot in South Lake Tahoe, the same area where he would later abduct Jaycee. During his trial, Phillip testified about his overwhelming sexual urges, admitting to relieving himself while watching young girls near school. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation diagnosed him with a mixed sexual deviation and chronic drug abuse, noting considerable anxiety, depression, and a personality disorder. Here we see another mental health red flag, the interplay between substance-induced psychosis and underlying personality issues, which can erode impulse control and moral reasoning. Phillip's plan relied on an impressive level of optimism regarding his ability to evade detection, the classic example of overconfidence masking deeper insecurities. Sentenced to 50 years in federal prison, Phillip served only 11 at Leavenworth in Kansas. There he met Nancy, a nursing aide visiting her uncle, and married her in 1981 during a prison ceremony. Nancy was born in 1955 in Texas and came from a background that included her own vulnerabilities, though details are limited. Psychologically, her role as an accomplice invites questions about codependency or shared delusions, where one partner's distorted beliefs reinforces the other's, creating a toxic dynamic that enabled the crime. Released on parole in 1988, Phillip moved back to California with Nancy, living in Antioch with his elderly mother. His parole conditions included regular monitoring, but lapses in oversight allowed his fantasies to resurface unchecked. This period underscores a systematic failure, but from a mental health angle, it highlights how inadequate treatment for personality disorders can lead to relapse, especially without addressing root causes like trauma and addiction. Back to Jaycee's captivity in 1991, Phillip initially kept her handcuffed and naked in a soundproof shed, guarded by dogs, providing minimal food like fast food while subjecting her to repeated rapes. And he forced her to take drugs during extended runs, periods of drug-fueled abuse lasting for days. Psychologically, this behavior indicates a compulsive need for dominance, possibly rooted in abandonment fears from his own unstable youth, where controlling a victim became a way to assert permanence in his life. Phillip alternated between violence and tearful apologies, claiming Jaycee was helping him with his sexual problems, as directed by voices he heard. These hallucinations point to possible schizophrenic-like symptoms, exacerbated by years of drug use where auditory commands justified his actions as divinely ordained. It's a reminder that confidence and competence don't always align, particularly when delusions override reality testing. By 1993, when Phillip briefly returned to prison for a parole violation involving positive drug tests, Nancy took over as Jaycee's primary captor. She provided some comforts, but also enforced isolation, showing jealousy toward Jaycee. This dynamic suggests that Nancy may have internalized Phillip's beliefs, a phenomenon where shared psychotic disorder binds accomplices in mutual reinforcement of harmful ideas. Jaycee gave birth to her first daughter in 1994 at age 14, delivering alone in the backyard with only books for guidance. Phillip reduced the rapes after this, but the psychological toll on Jaycee was immense, forcing her into a survival mode where she adapted by focusing on her child's well-being. From a victimology standpoint, this resilience highlights how trauma bonding can develop as a coping strategy, not out of affection, but a necessity to protect oneself and dependents. 3 years later, in 1997, Jaycee birthed her second daughter at age 17. Philip stopped the sexual assaults around this time, which shifted to a pseudo-family structure where Jaycee homeschooled the girls and worked in his printing business under the alias Alyssa. He indoctrinated them with stories of his divine powers, claiming he could control minds and hear angels. This grandiose delusion is a red flag for narcissistic personality features intertwined with psychotic elements, where the perpetrator views himself as superior, justifying the imprisonment as part of a higher purpose. Over the years, missed opportunities abounded. In 2006, a neighbor reported tents in the backyard with children living there, but police did not search thoroughly. And a 1992 tip about a girl resembling Jaycee at a nearby gas station went unheeded. Psychologically, Philip's ability to maintain the secret relied on his manipulative charm, often seen in individuals with antisocial traits who excel at deceiving authorities. The explanation he offered for the girl's presence was imaginative, if not particularly persuasive, relying on claims of relatives or divine intervention. In 2008, Philip had founded a church called God's Desire, distributing flyers and blogging about curing his urges through faith. He submitted documents to the FBI claiming he had overcome his deviance, a clear sign of denial and self-deception, where religious fervor masked unresolved pathology. This overconfidence in his transformation ultimately led to his downfall. In August 2009, Philip took Jaycee's daughters, then 11 and 15, to the University of California, Berkeley's campus to hand out religious literature. Campus officers noticed the girl's robotic demeanor and ran a background check, alerting his parole officer. The next day, August 26th, Philip arrived at the parole office with Nancy, Jaycee, and the girls. Under questioning, inconsistencies emerged, and Jaycee, fearing for her children, eventually revealed her identity. This moment provided an aha realization. The girls were Jaycee's daughters, fathered by Philip. From a psychological lens, Philip's decision to bring them public reflects a hubristic belief in his invincibility, a common pitfall where perceived cleverness clashes with actual detectability. Arrested that day, Philip and Nancy faced charges of kidnapping, rape, and false imprisonment. In 2011, they pleaded guilty. Philip received 431 years to life, while Nancy got 36 years to life, eligible for parole in 2029. Jaycee reunited with her mother Terry on August 27, 2009, and retained custody of her daughters. The state of California settled with Jaycee for $20 million in 2010, acknowledging parole failures. A federal lawsuit was later dismissed in 2016. Jaycee's psychological journey post-rescue involved therapy, including equine therapy with horses, helping her process the trauma. She has spoken about rejecting labels like Stockholm Syndrome, viewing her compassion toward Philip and Nancy as a deliberate survival tactic rather than genuine attachment. This insight reveals the complex mental health impacts on victims, where hypervigilance and adaptive disassociation allow endurance but require careful unpacking and recovery. Her daughters, raised in isolation, appeared intelligent and healthy, but needed support to integrate into society, facing challenges like understanding their origins without resentment. Philip and Nancy's motives seemed to be rooted in a desire for control amid chaos from his own traumas. His drug abuse likely intensified paraphilic urges, while delusions provided rationalization. Nancy's involvement suggests enmeshment, where loyalty to her husband overrode moral boundaries, possibly influenced by her own unmet needs. As someone who analyzes these patterns professionally, this case illustrates how untreated mental health issues combined with systemic oversights can enable prolonged harm. It also shows the human capacity for resilience, as Jaycee rebuilt her life, authoring 2 memoirs, A Stolen Life in 2011 and Freedom, My Book of First in 2016. These books detail her experiences without sensationalism, focusing on healing. Today, she lives privately with her daughters, running the Jaycee Foundation to aid families affected by trauma. Reflecting on Philip's choices, one might note that people sometimes overestimate their ability to rewrite reality through faith or denial. Spoiler, it rarely works against stubborn facts like evidence and intuition. This mental health analysis underscores the importance of early intervention for red flags like substance abuse and deviant behaviors. Understanding the why, rooted in trauma, delusions, and power dynamics, help us prevent future cases. Wow, so this is a very, very, very horrific case. It's not some fictional movie. This has actually happened. Jaycee endured horrific abuse and trauma for many, many years. She had 2 daughters because of it. And yet, the main story here, in my mind, the highlight of the story, is her resilience. She made it. And not only that, she survived and now she's thriving and helping others through her pain. Unimaginable what she went through. And Philip and Nancy are right where they need to be. What did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.